to be here with you this evening. Thank you to everyone joining us on Facebook and on YouTube. Tonight, we will have a discussion on the Guyana-Venezuela border controversy. The Guyana Dialogue is being sponsored by a coordinating council of Guyanese based in the US, UK, Canada, Guyana, and the Caribbean. Funding support is by well-known philanthropist Dave Narayan from Dave West Indian Imports. Tonight, we've prepared a video to show you in accordance to the Guyana-Venezuela border support from our very own Guyanese. Take a look.
We are a peaceful people, struggling, we struggle, and we don't look for trouble, just ask around. But when outside faces, from foreign places, talk about taking over, we ain't backing down. No, we ain't giving up no mountain, and we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river, that belong to we. Not the one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one for us, not a blade of grass. This land is our land now, we're gonna make it somehow. We will bend like a bow, but never break. Our fathers came here, and they lived and died here, and we are moving from here, make no mistake. No, we ain't giving up no mountain, and we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river, that belong to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one for us, not a blade of grass.
What?
We love the open country of the Rupanuni and the Essequibo, daytime or night. Though we criticize it, this is our home, we love it, and we mean to keep it, we have that right. No, we ain't giving up no mountain, and we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river, that belong to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one for us, not a blade of grass, not one golden apple, not one jamun, not a drop of water from the Pomeroon, not one sherriga, not one mommy, not one guinea pig,
No running or jumping.
not one sapodilla.
We are a peaceful people, struggling the struggle, and we don't look for trouble, just ask around. But when outside places, from foreign places, talking about taking over, we ain't backing down. No, we ain't giving up no mountains, no, we ain't giving up no trees, we ain't giving up no rivers, that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one grass, not a blade of grass. Venezuela, we ain't giving Essequibo to you. All of Guyana stands with Essequibo. All of Essequibo belongs to the Guyanese people.
Guyana is 83,000 square miles, and Essequibo belongs to Guyana.
We are a peaceful people, struggling, we struggle, and we don't look for trouble, just ask around.
Yes.
But when outside faces,
When you were yelling at Zane
from
just now.
foreign places, talk about taking over, we ain't backing down. No, we ain't giving up no mountain, no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belong to we. Not the one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one grass, not a blade of grass.
Thank you for joining us. Please welcome my moderator for tonight, Dr. Tara Singh.
Thank you very much, Shamisa, and thank you to our fellow panelists and also our guests, our chief guest.
Our
Minister of
panelists tonight are Professor Narayan Prasad, Dr. Ganga Ramdas, and our guest tonight is the Minister of Education, the Honorable Priya Manickchand.
Hello.
Yep.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone on the panel, and good evening to everyone who's watching and
Good evening,
listening.
ma'am. Before we start, I just want to make.
Dr. Tara, we will add our next panelist, Professor Mahindra Hariraj.
Oh, he's here. Okay.
Yes. Go ahead.
All right. Welcome, Professor Hariraj. Honorable Minister, before we start, I want to make some points or set the stage for the discussion to follow. First of all, I want to congratulate you on the reaching your 79% trained teachers. No one would have thought within 3 years you would accomplish that great task. And then with the teachers in training, when that is combined with the trained teachers, you said you'll reach 99% trained or in training teachers in the classroom. That is fantastic. Great achievement to you, the Ministry of Education, the teachers, and all the people who participated in that effort. You can talk about that a little later. But coming back to this controversy, I just want to highlight some things which you can focus on and the other panelists as well. We know that the boundary line was initially drawn by Schomburg in 1835, and the forest dispute arose around in 1840s, I believe 1846. Now, in the arbitral award, everybody knows that that was made in 1899, and that was activated by the Treaty of Washington in 1897. Now, that was accepted as a final settlement, the 1899 treaty, by both Venezuela and Guyana. Well, UK was acting on behalf of Guyana and the United States as well. Now, in 1911, when Venezuela celebrated its centenary independence, the Internal Affairs Minister, Alientado, accepted and authenticated the boundary line, which was set at the top of Mount Roraima. As a matter of fact, 20 years later, in 1831, Brazil, Venezuela, and British Guyana went up there. They set up this boundary, this monument. And what has happened, the Brazil side and the Venezuelan side have their plaques, etc., everything in touch. But the Guyana side was defaced. And according to Sir Srida Ramphal, that was defaced by Venezuela. Apparently, they want to get rid of evidence. Now, 50 years after the award in 1899, that is in 1949, 50 years afterwards, there's a guy, a delegate in the Venezuelan side whose name is Severo Malet Prevost, and a letter surfaced from him saying that there was collusion between the American and the Russian judge in the award process. And it is primarily on that basis that Venezuela has reopened or resurrect their claim over Guyana. Now, in 1962, they started to make the claim. Then in 1965, remember, the PNC government went to London on the Constitutional Conference to determine the date for Guyana independence. And the PNC was anxious to get independence, so they agreed to sign an agreement which later in 1966, which later became known as the Geneva Agreement, where they opened back the entire process. And here we are. So now we know what followed after then. The matter is in the World Court now, and a decision is supposed to be handed down on February. A preliminary on December, I think it was tomorrow, I think, December the 1st. Anyway, the matter, we can go into details later, but just put the broad line. But here are some issues which I think is very important for us to understand that Venezuela, the size of Venezuela is a little 4.2 times bigger than in Guyana. So they got 352,000 square miles. We only got 83,000 square miles. And what is reported in the literature most of the time is that they refer to this as 2/3 of Guyana, but actually it's almost 3/4. Is 74.2% of Guyana that they want to take, which is equal to 61,600 square miles. So that is one thing we need to take into consideration. And you know, the Essequibo, they call it Essequiba, and they refer to it as a zona en reclamación. That means a zone of reclamation. That's how they refer to them. Now, also, Venezuela has perhaps the largest reserve of oil, 300 billion barrels. Guyana only has so far 11 billion. Now, up to 1997, Venezuela was producing 3.4 million barrels of oil a day. Today, they're just producing about 750,000 barrels of oil a day. Now, you can imagine that dramatic slump. Less than 1/4 they're producing now. Also, the inflation rate is reaching the sky, 360%. So that explains the economic plight, the downturn of the economy, where within the past couple of years, over 7.7 million, according to the Human Rights United Nations Human Rights Body, estimates 7.7 million Venezuelans have fled. 4 million cannot flee from the country, so they got to depend on food, emergency food help. So the situation in Venezuela is very dire. Now, people are asking why, with so much potential wealth, they want to come into Guyana. They also have gold, diamond, etc. And people positive, they said, is greed, jealousy, etc. But other people propose a different idea, and probably we can discuss this in the panel, that Venezuela was really pushing. One of the three components they were pushing was joint ventures in Guyana. They feel if they can engage or twist Guyana to go into joint ventures as they did with Trinidad, that the West may look upon them more favorably, because remember, they are under heavy sanctions. And that's why they can't produce too much oil, etc. So if they join with Guyana, they believe the West could be more lenient to them so they can up their production. So that's one theory. I don't know whether it's correct or not, but most people are focused on the greed side of it. But I think that we got to look at other dynamics. Now, the final things I want to say is that Um, I don't know what's happening, but the last report I read that Brazil is mobilizing because for them to try to annex Guyana, they got to traverse certain areas in Brazil. So Brazil is trying to mobilize its forces to prevent them from coming. Now, that's technical, logistical, security matters. So let's go back now. Now, Minister, I know you have appeared in quite a few programs to talk about this, and you have even intimated that you will ensure that the board and other historical issues in Ghana be taught in school. That is an excellent idea. So maybe you can start with that and elaborate. So,
Yeah, so you're right, Dr. Tara, on most of these issues. The long and short of it, I mean, we could go into every year and what happened, but the long and short of it is that in the second half of the 19th century, Venezuela raised this issue of who owns the Essequibo, and they invoked international help to make that determination with an undertaking that they would be bound by by the decision, and they would treat it as full, final, and perfect. That's the 1899 award. And importantly, after that arbitral award, Venezuela treated the award and the contents of the award, giving Essequibo to Guyana, as full, final, perfect, and legal. They drew maps, they made laws, they had other arrangements with other countries like Brazil, determining borders based on the content of that award. And it's only when Guyana started getting independence, or started going closer and edging closer to independence, that they raised this question again, based on Severo Male Provost's memorandum. Now, this was a man who was very, very junior on the legal team, who claimed corruption, on that there was corruption amongst the arbitrators when the award was happening. But he didn't say anything at the time. 4 to 5 years later is when he penned this memorandum claiming this corruption. And Venezuela knew about that, but took no action for 13 years after he had penned it, when our independence was in sight. That led to a Geneva Agreement, which was agreed upon to lay out the processes by which this matter would be solved, or resolved. Just after that, they had 4 years of a mixed commission that resulted in nothing. And then 20 something years, 27 years to be exact, of another process arising out of the Geneva Agreement. The long and short is Venezuela has had all kinds of opportunities and invitations to prove or present any kind of evidence that says Essequibo belongs to them, or particularly that there was corruption when that determination was made in 1899. And they have failed, refused, neglected, at every turn to provide that evidence. Recently, in the International Court of Justice, they refused to participate in making the presentation about why the court should rule in their favor. So where are we right now? We're at a place right now where Venezuela has gone to their people, are going to their people on the 3rd of December to ask them through a referendum to, one, treat the arbitral award as null and void, two, to determine that the court, the ICJ, has no jurisdiction over this matter, and three, to annex or take Venezuela into as and treat it as not Venezuela, Essequibo, treat it as Venezuelan territory. Guyana has said very clearly that while we cannot and do not intend to stop the referendum, we're asking the International Court of Justice to make an injunction, if you will, that says to them that you cannot give any effect to any referendum until the substantive matter is heard. The substantive matter is the matter, examining the boundary lines again, and whether or not the 1899 award was final and perfect, and if it's going to stay in place. That decision comes out tomorrow at 10 o'clock Guyana time, and I mean, maybe 9 your time. And so it's going to be very interesting. I have every confidence that the court is going to say that Venezuela cannot give effect to any kind of referendum position that comes out of the 3rd of December. And all that makes sense. If the court is looking at the substantive matter, that is, who owns this territory? Where does the border fall? Who is the 1899 award going to stand? Is it not going to stand? Then they have to pause everything else while they make that judgment, make that determination. And so I expect tomorrow the court is going to say, I mean, we're lawyers and we're not supposed to preempt a court, but I would be really stunned if the court did not make an injunctive order tomorrow. I believe they will, but we're not far away from tomorrow, so we're going to see that. In any event, Guyana has been clear, and we have been consistent throughout the last century. We are going to be a law-abiding state. We are going to employ the civilized international norms type of way of addressing this issue. We believed and have always treated Venezuela like ours. So Venezuela is funded by the Guyana government, by the state of Guyana, by the people of Guyana. Health, education, senior citizens, infrastructure has always been funded and dealt with by the state of Guyana and the people of Guyana. Um, Other countries have treated us throughout the years as having dominion and ownership of the Essequibo. And that is why I believe that countries have not found it difficult to support us. So the CARICOM has made some very strong statements in support of Guyana, and I'll read that for you. CARICOM insists that the referendum proposed by Venezuela has no validity, bearing, or standing in international law in relation to this controversy. The referendum is a purely domestic construct, but its summary effect is likely to undermine peace, tranquility, security, and more in our region. CARICOM reiterates its support for the judicial process and expresses the hope that Venezuela will engage fully in that process before the International Court of Justice, which has determined that it has jurisdiction in the case brought before it to determine the validity of the 1899 arbitral award, which Venezuela questions. We also have gotten very strong statements of support from the Commonwealth through Baroness Patricia Scotland, the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, and this is what they say. The Commonwealth stands with the government and people of Guyana and with our partners in CARICOM in expressing our concern over the questions in the planned referendum. And the Commonwealth continues to stand for the rule of law and reaffirms its firm and steadfast support for the maintenance and preservation of the sovereign and territorial integrity of Guyana, an unobstructed exercise of its rights to develop the entirety of its territory for the benefit of its people. And from the Organization of American States, we vehemently decry intimidatory tactics that seek to undermine the principle of good neighborliness. We recognize the right of Guyana to welcome investors. Guyana must preserve its territorial integrity and security by addressing its case with Venezuela at ICJ. And we have seen the United States of America, Great Britain, Brazil, and other friends individually step forward to reaffirm that at this stage, Essequibo belongs to Guyana, and any resolution of this matter must happen not in Venezuela unilaterally at a referendum, but at the International Court of Justice. And so we feel very confident that we have the support of the international community because throughout this process we have been and it's been consistent for over 100 years, where we have just made sure that we did not go and encroach Venezuela's land or property or fight them somewhere on the border or across the border. We've always employed the civilized way of addressing this. You know, it's also very interesting that Venezuelans who are here have staged open exercises of support to Guyana and a repudiation, really, of Venezuela's intent to hold this referendum. We also saw from the Venezuelan opposition leader, Maria Machado, saying that she believes this should be suspended and
Okay.
we should wait the outcome of the court. So, Maduro stands alone on this matter. The problem here, and you alluded to it earlier, is that he has real problems with his election next year. That seems to be the motivation here. People are fleeing Venezuela to other countries. Right here in Guyana, we have quite a large population of Venezuelans, either original organic Venezuelans or people who fled Guyana at some in the 80s and went to Venezuela and either had children there and are coming back now. So we have a large influx of Venezuelans into Guyana because Venezuela is really, really hard. They're not getting food, they're not getting service, they're not getting help in the various ways that human beings need help from the state in which they live. And so that's why people are running. Nobody runs from good. So they have some real problems internally. And they're using this boundary dispute, which they're calling it, we don't have a dispute, to whip up support for the government. But I believe, and we're seeing that now, that the world is not going to stand by idly and let that happen. Because the truth is, if any country is allowed to just get and erase a boundary line and unilaterally extend that, then no country in the world is safe. No border will be intact. The integrity of borders around the country is going to be in jeopardy. Canada could wake up tomorrow and decide that we're just going to extend Canada into the US or vice versa. And so everybody understands that this is just not how we operate in the world. We have to operate with some law and order and with some rules about how we determine very important matters like borders. And so tomorrow is going to be a big day for us to see what the court says. But I would find it extremely difficult if they said anything other than what I think they would say, which I just told you.
All right. Thank you very much, Minister. Professor Narayan, you have any comment or any question for the minister?
Not so much a question.
Professor Narayan,
Yes, can you hear me? You can hear me?
we can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Okay, let me see this.
You're having some problem.
You can
Dr.
hear me?
Ganga, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you go ahead, and Professor Narayan has to fix his phone. Go ahead.
Yes, our minister has given us a very illuminating account, the historic circumstances, and also the timeline that is implied uh, in the controversy. I'd like to follow through on that, and then I will ask the question and make a comment. The Going back to the origination of the substantive award versus greed. In 1811, we have to realize that the United States of Venezuela got its independence, and it was a mature state. It understood all the parameters of international law and also the use of such tools like arbitration. It understood those things. So, in looking back now, in 1814, Great Britain got uh, the the titles to all of those lands uh, from the Netherlands. And then in 1835, the Schomburg, who was a surveyor at that time, he drew a line and set up the boundaries. And by 1897, Venezuela at that time sought international arbitration. That's 2 years before the 1899 award. So what happened in 1899, October the 3rd? Venezuela got the entire Orinoco Delta, and then it also got control through the Barama Point.
Mm.
Now, that was in favor of Venezuela. And then there was a minor adjustment to the Schomburg line where Venezuela's boundary was shifted and they got more territory. So, what Venezuela is trying to do now is to apply political considerations instead of going with the norms of international law. And I will say, as a standing member in the United Nations, to observe those rules and protocols of the United Nations. So let's go back to what Venezuela is saying. The contract is null and void. Well, if the contract is null and void, then Venezuela should give back the entire Orinoco Delta and all of the territories that lie outside of the Schomburg line. It can't just take half the contract, accept half, and reject the other half. So I hope the international community would see this. And I would say that our minister is correct in saying that we have control or we own these territories. We have the property rights to the territory. So the question is, how do we um, implement the 1899 agreement? Should Great Britain be involved in this discourse?
Yeah. Well, in addition to Guyana getting land and Venezuela getting land, in during that 1899 process, Brazil also was at the tri-junction point, and Venezuela has never approached Brazil to claim anything. So, in fact, it has negotiated and engaged with Brazil in a way that shows, in a way that clearly says that it recognizes the content of the award in 1899. The question about whether we should engage help, yes, absolutely. I think international relations generally dictate that where interests align, and they don't always align on every issue, but where interests align, countries must come together and stand as one, and unite in causes that are important to the world. Like I said, outside of the fact that there are already two raging wars that are harmful to the rest of the world, and we saw that when prices started rising on different things, wheat products and so on. Well, I don't know that the world wants another acts of aggression in this part. But outside of that, if Venezuela were allowed to unilaterally redraw a border, taking in two-thirds of another country, then what stops Mexico from doing that? What stops Canada from doing that? What stops any other country from doing that? And the world simply cannot exist in a way where there's that level of uncertainty. We have to be predictable in how we determine issues like this, if we're going to have any kind of stability in the world. And so I think in 1897, when this became an issue, Venezuela actually went to the United States and essentially said, look, big bad Great Britain is coming after me and would like to take some of our land. And at the time, the US had the Monroe Doctrine in place, which sought to, any kind of colonial power trying to take territory in the Americas. America was resisting that. And it was so tense that America almost went to war on this issue, and then diplomacy prevailed. America now, today, the American ambassador made a very clear statement about its offer of support to Guyana. This earlier in the week, the two governments met and reaffirmed that they would continue to work closely. 2 days ago, troops came into Guyana from the United States of America to continue to do work that we had done before. The president is currently in Dubai, not only at the meeting at the COP and at the climate conference, but also meeting on the sidelines world leaders who are our friends and getting support for us on the issue. Britain spoke to the president at that meeting, and a release was issued earlier that said essentially that they were supporting Guyana's um, claim to the Essequibo based on the 1899 arbitral award, and that if that were going to be disturbed in any way, that it had to be done through the International Court of Justice. We ourselves have been very clear. We believe Venezuela is our friend. Venezuela has had good relations with us in the past. In fact, President Chavez was here. Yeah, I was at the time Minister of Human Services, so that would be somewhere around 2008, 2009. And when President Chavez was here, he said very clearly that this entire border dispute problem was really a construct of imperialism, and it was an imperialist ploy to keep countries who ought to be friends apart and who had like-mindedness on some ideological points apart. And so at this point, it is in our interest to be friendly with and to rely on and to seek the support of as many countries as we can. At this stage, I do not know of any other country except Nicaragua who has spoken on the issue that is supporting Venezuela. And that's very different from a few years ago when they had more support. So I think I would feel very comfortable relying on our friends and allies around the world to stand with us in our position that has been sustained over the years that really says that this should be resolved in the court. President Ali has been very clear. We would be happy to talk to Venezuela on every other issue, but on this issue, it should be resolved by the court because we've been trying for over 100 years to talk to each other, and that keeps failing. So we don't. Although Maduro is saying that we should deal with this bilaterally, our position is in Guyana is that we will not. We can talk on other issues, but on this issue, it will be determined at the court.
Thank you very much. Professor Narayan, is your system working? Can you hear now? Professor Narayan. Shami
He has
says,
to unmute.
can you unmute?
You're good.
Okay, go ahead now.
Yeah, I would like to take this discussion in a different perspective. And that is, even though it's a recurring issue with the border line,
We can't hear him, Dr. Tara. Let's move on to Professor Hari Raj,
Something,
and
yeah.
we'll come back to him.
Professor Hariraj, go ahead.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. I'm very happy to hear the historical context of how we got here. I'm not going to rehash all of the very specific details. Minister Manickchand, given where we are, and tomorrow the International Court is going to meet to pronounce on measures based upon the referendum that Venezuela is heading to on December 3rd. What does it mean for the region, or Guyana specifically, and the region, given that we all can somehow weigh, that their ultimate outcome, given the historical facts of this situation, that will be in favor in Guyana's favor? What does that mean for the country from a developmental perspective, from a risk perspective, and also from an international precedence?
Sorry, you broke for 1 minute there. That for a little bit there.
I'm asking, given that the International Court of Justice more than likely tomorrow will make its ruling on the intermediary sort of business that went to court, and Guyana is not trying to tell Venezuela how to conduct its internal politics, but it's asking the court, given the overall objective of the court now to settle this ongoing issue, given that the court more than likely will be or resulting in Guyana's favor. What does that mean for our current country situation from a developmental perspective, from a safety perspective? Because if Venezuela is already, and the vice president of Venezuela could have said in the International Court of Justice that by whatever means they are going to proceed with this referendum, it means that they are not going to recognize international law and norms. So, what does that mean for us from a safety perspective, from also a developmental perspective? Because Guyana has been at the forefront of a global transformation. Does this impede the pace at which we go? Because now we have this new issue that is critical to every single Guyanese across the spectrum.
Yeah, so it's a very loaded question. So let's take it bit by bit. Venezuela is actually asking in that referendum that their people say that the court has no jurisdiction over them. So then they seem to be barreling down the road that they will ignore what the court says. But that's not something, and I think we have to be very honest with our population and our people, both here and in the diaspora, and we have not shied away from doing that. And that's why people should trust what we say, because we have been straightforward, we've been very factual, we've been very clear from the beginning. So we can't and have never tried to stop Venezuela from having their referendum. They can have a referendum if they want. What we're saying is that they should not be able to in any way give effect to anything that comes out of that referendum. Now, what should Guyana do? Guyana is going to be, and we've been very clear about that, we're prepared, we are mobilized, we are, our discipline services, our army, our police have been mobilized, and they're prepared and ready to deal with any eventuality. We are also speaking very clearly and firmly and not in a way that is half hearted to our allies around the country. And that is why the special forces that came in from the US is a special strategic force that has worked with us before. You saw a single photograph of the Brigadier Omar Khan meeting with the Brazilian military. You've seen reports that the Brazilian military has mobilized to come to their borders with us and with Venezuela. Um, you see the United States talking to us talking to Great Britain. And so we're going to be prepared for any eventuality. And that means that um, we'll be prepared to reject any kind of incursion onto our land. I also think it's important that, very, very important, that we reject persons even amongst us who will, one, give into, and two, spread fear. And you see the reckless, I mean, some, I'm never sure about social media. I don't know if these things are jokes. I don't know if it's an insensitivity to the seriousness of the issue. I don't know if it's just somebody being a clown who's unintelligent. But you see, the memes and the satire and so on aside, I saw influencers and social media personalities who might have respect for given the work that they do, being very light and reckless about representations they made. Somebody was saying that I had fled the country and I was in Florida. I was in Florida, but virtually, doing exactly what I'm doing now, talking to Floridians about the issue because they wanted information and they wanted facts. And it was a poster being used to say that I was in Florida, or that the president has fled, or that, well, yesterday, as I was on the Florida diaspora program, someone sent me a clip of soldiers fighting at a border that had nothing to do with Guyana and Venezuela, but representing that it did. Nothing can come out of anyone panicking. Nothing can come out of anyone spreading fear. Nothing can come out of us throwing up our arms. I am saying that I have everyone I love in this country, and I am very confident that we are prepared, and that we have friends who are standing with us in this time to make sure that the peace is maintained in both lands. I think there's a lot at stake, and we have to be very careful and responsible with our language. I think it's also a good time to remind your listeners that in June of this year, Guyana was voted on to the UN Security Council as a non permanent member. And we take up our seat there in January. And, the UN Security Council is the premier body internationally for maintaining peace and order internationally. So it's a good place to be as far as our interests go. And as far as, I mean, if people can rely on us to be a member to maintain peace and order internationally around the world, then surely I think we're in good standing to expect the same from our friends and allies around the world. The UN, this entire process, the Geneva Agreement, is an agreement, and the approach to the court and the good offices process and the mixed commission were all UN inspired, United Nations inspired action at resolution. So I think you asked me how it affects our safety. I try to address that. I think we're safe. I think I said to someone last night, feel free to come into the country because they had their tickets booked. People are carrying on with Christmas activities, buying their Christmas trees, putting it up, um, playing Christmas music, and doing Christmassy kinds of things. That is not to say that we are not. We are actively, as a state, raising awareness about the issue and um, hosting and causing a series of activities to inspire patriotism. Tomorrow, schools across the country, every single school across this country tomorrow is going to shut down to host activities of patriotism with their children from the smallest nursery child to our post secondary institutions. They're going to be at nursery coloring the flag and doing collages with the map and learning about all of Esseco, all of Guyana belongs to all of us. In the primary, the children are going to hear a story, they're going to do the acrostic, they're going to say poems and sing national songs. In secondary schools across the country, there are assemblies happening tomorrow. On Sunday, we're going to link hands from one end of the country to the other end of the country, a human chain of love. Um, and chain shows support for our territory and integrity of our borders. We're going to have in the evening a night of reflection, of patriotic reflection. And so while we are not going to be afraid, we're also not going to bury our heads in the sand because this is an important issue for us. We hope that President Maduro is going to have a second thought about what he's doing. But if he doesn't, we will be ready.
Okay,
Thank
I
you.
know we are trying to get.
Yeah,
Thank you,
can you
Professor.
hear?
We'll come back
Can
to
you
you.
hear me? Can you
I
hear
was
me?
trying to, yeah, Professor, go ahead now.
No, I would like to
Go ahead.
I would like to turn this discussion on its head. Yes, there are laws over historical laws. There are
Speak a
historical.
little louder.
I said that there are historical laws and there are historical precedences that supports Guyana. But we have to realize that today we are dealing with a dictator, and one has to get into the psyche of the dictator. And the reason I say this, the United States cannot have a standing army in Guyana forever, as long as Maduro is in power. So we have to take that dictator at his word. He is losing support internally, and he is losing support externally also. Because if you look at his record, Panama and Colombia, he is persona non grata. So he can't go to these countries, neither to the United States. It is he has an army about the two-thirds of the population of Guyana, which means that he can terrorize the country for as long as he wants. Guyana army, you can say you're ready, but Guyana can never be ready with an army that is not one one third or one quarter the size of Venezuela's army. So we have to rely on the external alliances to prevail and on the international bodies that can ratify all those past regulations that we have, territorial regulations that we have had. If we only put emphasis on the historical aspect, we are forgetting that we are dealing with an authoritarian leader who sees himself as being the next Saudi Arabia in the Caribbean, if he can only have control of Guyana. So we have to be able to not only affect him from external, but from internal as well, where he is losing support, where inflation is very high, and where, as you said, Dr. Singh, that over 7 million people have either exited the country or are seeking exits from the country. So the internal stability is what is more important, or is as important as the external support that we have. And I'd like the panel to voice their convictions on what I've just said in terms of that.
Let's
Dr.
hear
Tari,
it.
Dr. Tari, if I may,
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
uh, Professor Narayan, I think you made a valid point. However, I think you offer some introspect as to the answer.
Yeah,
While Maduro may be a dictator, you said it. He's losing internal support, and that is already weakening his approach in the international arena. In addition to that, this, I believe, approach or attempt to annex Guyana is a clear indication of his political failure. Because a country that has an inflation rate in the 300%, thousands of people fleeing a country, it in plainer language tells you of a failed government administration. So, right minded Venezuelans that is listening to this program near and far will understand while Maduro might have an infatuation in his mind, he has to accept reality in an international setting. Guyana is also at a juncture in the international platform that other countries cannot afford for Maduro to exercise these rogue behavior. So I think while the concern is authentic, the measures around Guyana, I understand the limitations for our military, but that is why we build allies and why international relationship and bipartisan is critical. And those are the things that Guyana has to be taking into consideration. How, as I asked Minister Manickchand, how do we learn from this to stabilize Guyana, the current challenges, but also set the platform to strengthen other areas as we are developing? So I would perhaps approach that question and respond to it that way. I hope.
All right. Thank you, Professor. Let's get
Well, you know,
Dr.
could I say that when you're running in thousands, not hundreds, not a few. Guyana alone has more than 40,000 Venezuelans here. When you're running from your country in thousands, it means people aren't getting to eat, they're not getting health care, they're not getting services in the education center, they're not getting social services. Life is rough. And those people would include the Venezuelan armed forces. Those people would include the same people that a despot would have to rely on. And so, while purely looking at numbers might be, um, something that concerns you, I think you have to, what is the whole purpose for this? Why did this come up now? All of a sudden, there's a national election next year, and you're making these kinds of threats because this, I think, any kind of the one thing that Maduro hopes for is some kind of united stand on this issue, on an issue, any issue. And this was the issue to do it on. He can't go and tell people vote for him. He can't go and tell people who are hungry and who can't look after their sick and who have nowhere to put their elderly. He can't go and tell them vote for him. So, what does he say on a platform when he stands up? This is purely a domestic issue that he's trying to resolve. He's getting serious opposition. America has threatened sanctions again if he does anything to interfere with the opposition's freedom to oppose him and run a clean campaign. So he has real internal issues. When you have internal issues, they affect people you would have to rely on that look like strong numbers to the rest of us when you're just looking at it as plain numbers. So you have all of that going on also. But we have been very clear, very, very clear that we will rely on our friends here. We have been very open. We've published at every turn. I mean, there's some things you can't say because they're security uh, blocks on why you can't speak about them. But we've been very, very clear that we are relying on our close and far neighbors and the powers of the world, and we are not going to have anything stand in the way of a full and wholesome defense of our integrity and of the integrity of our borders.
But I made
Okay.
the point. I made the point that we need the internal and the external to
Yeah.
operate.
No, no, you
And,
answered it
and,
yourself.
and
Mm.
but
Okay.
they are, we cannot overlook the Putin effect because he
Mm.
has control over the army. While Venezuela was suffering, well, Venezuelans are suffering. He has paid the army very well, and so in his own egotistical fashion, that doesn't mean that he will retract all of a sudden. So the pressure, the internal and external pressure, has to be imposed upon him because he can utilize the army at his will, just like Putin has done with Ukraine
So
and
Maria
opposition.
Machado has very clearly said, I don't have the ability to pull up any picture for your screen, but if someone out there can do it and throw it up, she has clearly called for a suspension of the referendum.
Yeah.
She said this is not the time for it and that we should wait for the court. She didn't say Essequibo doesn't belong to Venezuela because, they have been talking about that since they were nursery schools, but she has in nursery school, but she has been clear that we should wait, that the country needs to suspend any referendum. And she's calling on people, and she has a large following also. She's his most um, credible and opposition person right now. And so there is internal resistance to this too. It's not all of Venezuela barreling down this road to do this.
Mm.
I
Okay, Doc.
also know that Brazil has sent an envoy there. Other countries are speaking to Venezuela separate and apart from our conversations with them. And Venezuela is a part of the world. They're going to be severely affected if they were to become pariahs to the entire world.
Dr. Ganga, your contribution.
Yes, I think we need to pull the political levers at the United Nations some more and mobilize uh, our alliances there and the friendly nations there, and make sure that Maduro gets painted as a troublemaker and a destabilizing force in the region, and also what's to come up in the southern hemisphere. He's not to be trusted on anything, and I think that message should go out, emanate from us, and then let others echo it across the international community. So, what's your reaction to that, Minister?
So we have Carlin Rodriguez is our um, permanent representative to the United Nations, or PR, and she's based in Washington. And we have had government delegations traveling to Washington to discuss this issue with the United States government, and we have engaged our partners and countries in the UN system on this. Like I said, we were voted in as a non-permanent member to the UN Securities Council. Now that is really the council that would be activated if the UN were to have any kind of peacekeeping force in Guyana, if that were ever to become necessary. So as I'm sure you can imagine that all our diplomatic channels are employed because we believe in diplomacy. We believe it is effective. We believe it works. We had um, controversies also with Suriname, and we resolved that using diplomacy and legal means and accepted international channels for this. And those things are not usually, I mean, I'm sure you can imagine what you see is really a fraction of what's happening in terms of the conversations happening with and amongst countries. I can tell you that, given, I mean, I just read for you, the Commonwealth Secretary General or Commonwealth Secretariat speaks for all of the countries in the Commonwealth, which means that they would have had to engage all those countries before they issue that statement. CARICOM was very clear. They believe any kind of disturbance in Guyana between Guyana and Venezuela would cause instability in the entire region. And you know why. These countries are it's such a small village these days. So we have spared no effort. That's why I thought it was very naive and disingenuous for anyone to suggest that the president was on a holiday. The president is meeting world leaders on climate issues, but also on our border issues. He's speaking to persons in the sideline. That's where all the world leaders are. And as he speaks to them, he's making releases about what the conversation was and what the commitments were. Vice President and General Secretary of the PPP, Barjack, they was also there. So this is not something we are treating lightly. It's not something we're taking a back seat on. It's not something we're being reckless about. But we will also not aggravate a situation. And so while we are treating this with every seriousness, we also have to be measured because um, we have had a history of strategically addressing our issues in with authorities that had jurisdiction over those issues, and that has always worked. But we haven't. I don't think it's one or the other, and we haven't gone down any one track. There's a lot of work happening on our borders. I'm no expert in security, border security, but if you were to check out any kind of literature on it, they would tell you that it's not only the armed forces, but your members in communities on borders also play an important role. And we've been engaging the border communities and villages actively and robustly, but all of that doesn't get published because you don't always publish your security um, efforts. That would make them counterproductive.
Oh, okay. We're nearing, as a matter of fact, we passed our time, but I just want to clarify something. Professor Mahina asked you a question. I know he asked a series of questions. I think one of his concern was what will happen with the development process given this threat.
It's a
Whether that
very
will
good
affect
question.
investment, etc.
So we there was a time when Guyana depended heavily on IFIs, international financial institutions, and it broke my heart because the World Bank, for example, refused to invest our money because we were borrowing the money. So that's really very quite annoying and frustrating. Have us invest our money in building any schools or infrastructure in Region 2, in Regions 1, 7, 8, and 9, any kind of in the area that was um, a part of this controversy. And that meant not building schools. That meant that we needed. That meant not developing learning institutions that we needed. And that was really a stymie to our development. It was unfair. It was horrible. And so what we immediately did, so we are currently building schools in Region 1, three high schools. We're currently building a high school in Region 9. This is from local funds. And so the this controversy has affected us in real and tangible ways, not just psyche. Your question is really poignant, and I'll tell you. There was a time when we had no choice but to depend on these IFIs, and we had no choice but to be controlled and managed and be subject to conditions by them. And Ghana was really poor. And when we were in the 80s, when most of our income or all of our income was going towards debt, when people were fleeing this country because they simply couldn't manage, when our poverty rate was 6 to 7%, we were at a place where we were far more vulnerable. As soon as we started earning, we started reducing our national debt. We started investing in people. So the PPP is known for something where we get funds and excess funds thrown back into investments, building hospitals, building schools, um, training more teachers and nurses and doctors, putting down roads and bridges, making people's lives easier. That brings a different level of stability that you can't measure all the time. Uh, the population's happiness, the population's feeling of security. People who refuse, we have thousands of Guyanese now with US visas who live in Guyana. There was a time in this country when the purpose of applying for a US visa was to flee Guyana, leaving us weaker intellectually, weaker on the security front, weaker on the ability to develop, weaker in our capacity. That's no longer happening. So these kinds of that's why I say development can't always be measured by roads and bridges, but how that strengthens the country and its response to outside threats. And so what you asked is extremely important. Is it only about developing because that's what good governments do? Or is that development aimed at improving each life, the livelihoods in that household, but also defending our state against brain drains and incursions from another state, and having people understand that? I am very pleased with the responses I see from people who are here. And of course, we're very, very, very appreciative of the diaspora support. I mean, just you having this program tonight, um, and your viewership seems to be higher than it was normally, and which means and there's a diaspora unit in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that's doing rounds across the various diaspora. The interest of people outside of Guyana is also highly appreciated, but the happier you make people in your country, the more prepared you make them. It's a bigger capacity for the security you're talking about. So sometimes you can't always measure dollar for dollar how that works, but I think it's important that governments keep their people happy. In fact, to juxtapose it with Venezuela, he has to be a little nervous about how strong his security forces will support a call for any kind of movement, given that they're so unhappy in their own country. He has to be concerned about how his own people who have fled to Guyana will help to defend Guyana against that incursion because of the suffering they had in their country. So if you flip this back, and I mean, we have been an important thing that I didn't say for the night, but it's very, very clear. And I mean, we have some wild cards in all the political parties, but throughout the history of this dispute, from the beginning of time, the political parties in Guyana have stood united in their position that Essequibo belongs to Guyana and that there will be no effort spared in defense of that fact and the territory and the borders and the integrity of the borders. You have one or two wild cards who associate themselves with various political parties who might say something that could give a different impression, but the political parties themselves have been very clear about their position on this issue. You know, I had two massive programs, awareness programs that went live on all our channels and was done in schools. At Queen's College, we had the leader of the Alliance for Change on that stage with us, Comrade Ramjatan, and that is because I had actually called Aubrey Norton to come, and he didn't answer his phone. And so I went to the second highest leader in the opposition, parliamentary opposition, which is Camraj. At the Bishop's High School, we had two opposition. Carl Greenwich, who ran for leadership of the PNC, R was on that stage with Anil Nandalal and I, and Mark Curtin, who is also a strong supporter of the People's National Congress. We had a motion in the National Assembly where everybody affirmed and reaffirmed their commitment to making sure Guyana's borders and the integrity of the borders stayed intact. Um, those, I don't think Maduro, not I don't think Maduro is not enjoying the same unity, and that is an important thing. It can't be measured, but it's an important weakness that he has to live with. And I hope that informs his action. I truly hope that tomorrow, when the court says that they would expect, which is what I'm expecting them to say, Venezuela not to give effect to any question that arises out of, or any answer that arises out of the referendum, that sense prevails and that referendum is suspended or altogether cancelled. I hope that's what happens tomorrow, but we'll see.
All right, thank you very much, Minister. I know this time is up on us. We've gone beyond that. I wish we could have spent another half hour or so, but I pass you over now to our host, Shamiza. You have any questions?
And Dr. Tara, I don't have any questions, but I know Mahindra probably had something final that he wanted to say.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I think, Dr. Tar, thank you for re-raising that question. But I saw earlier today the Prime Minister issued a statement to reassure Guyanese to be calm and to be rational. And I think I want to echo those sentiments, as this juncture of our country requires us to be patient, vigilant, and be supportive of each other across the spectrum, irrespective of our political affiliation, creed, ethnicity, race. We got to live as one Guyana. So, with that being said, I know Minister Manickchand has outlined what the government is doing proactively, from engaging with international allies on the ground, etc. And I want to turn it over to her because she has really provided us greater depth and context as to what is currently happening in the cabinet level in government.
Thank you.
Yes, I think it's very important. I can't underscore enough how important it is for everybody to be responsible. The Prime Minister was forced to issue that statement today because you have wild cards amongst us who are um, narrow-mindedly prepared to hurt Guyana and Guyanese in an effort to score cheap political points. And those are really the two-bit politicians, but they have a voice. And with the advent of social media and everybody being able to access an account, a lot of damage can be caused. And so at this point, history will judge you. Where did you stand in this moment when your country needed you? Where did you stand in this time when what was called for was a responsible, measured, sensitive, sensible approach? Were you spreading misinformation in the name of humor or politics? Or were you standing united with the rest of the country and the diaspora in defense of our borders? How did you behave in this time? And history records everything we do these days. So the funny memes and the posts and so on will be there for posterity. And so I'm asking everyone that this is a serious moment for us all. And I believe firmly in prayer. And so I'm asking the prayer warriors around Guyana, regardless of what religion you're from, to get down in some serious prayer on this issue. Um, and I'm also asking everyone else to pay attention to legitimate sources of information. Your government, your president, your vice president, your ministers, I promise you that you will get your information from us. And what you get from us is going to be accurate, it's going to be factual, it's going to be fully aware and sensitive to all the issues. Do not rely on any other source but official sources for your information, or you could end up harming yourself, your family, and your country. And so I think it's an important time for us all to pause and determine for ourselves, how will I go through the next few weeks? What do I want to be representing to those around me? Do I want to be a responsible citizen who stood with my country in its time of need? Or do I want to be the class clown who chooses these very serious issues to score cheap points, either jokey points, humorous points, or political points on? So that's my parting comment for tonight. And I'm always available to answer questions or offer clarifications on anything that you and your viewership would like me to do.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Shamiza?
Uh, Thank you, Minister Manickchand. Now, as you can imagine, it's a tough time for everyone that's involved. The people of Guyana, I'm sure some people in Venezuela, it's a very, very tough time. If you could look them in the eye right now, the people, imagine they're in front of you, and you can send them a message that everything will be okay, what would you say to them right now?
To the people of Guyana, your government is not unaware of the threats that we face. And um, purely from a humanitarian service oriented way, we will serve you every single day, every single minute. But I also invite you to consider that it is in our interest to make sure we defend the borders as a political party in office. Um, Politicians exist to own political power, and so they tell you different reasons about why they exist, but that's really why they exist, to have and enjoy political power most times, or for the good ones like us, so that we could use that power to serve. And we are fully aware that this is a threat to our country. We are aware that people are concerned and unhappy and worried. And we tell you that no effort is being spared anywhere, with our friends, with our allies, personally and locally, domestically, in our own um, discipline services. No efforts are being spared to uh, keep you informed and to repel any kind of aggression. We have managed very well, even with far less resources. Every time this issue raised its head, we have managed with other countries that we had border skirmishes or territorial skirmishes with. And we have always been steadfast in our commitment to resolving those kinds of issues peacefully and legitimately in a civilized way that is accepted by the rest of the world. We won't stop that, but we also won't be bury our heads in the sand in terms of what we need to do and what efforts need to be made to make sure that everyone in this country remains safe. To the people of Venezuela, I say this: your current government could barely manage you. They're unable to look after you and your children and your parents and the population there. Coming here or trying to annex Essequibo is them trying to distract you from the hardships you're facing. Reject it. Reject the effort to use you to stay in an office that they will not use to serve you. And so I'm asking the people of Essequibo to resist any effort. Don't turn up for this referendum. Resist any effort for to be used to hurt other people and another country whose arms have been open to you and your people throughout time. So, and I say this to you, nothing better will come to you if with this effort that your president is trying to engage you in, nothing good will come to you for it. And so you should resist every effort by Maduro to engage you in this exercise. Just refuse to be engaged in this exercise.
Thank you very much. And there you heard it today. Anything, any information that you need, please reach out to to the minister and anyone else that you feel that is relevant for that type of information, guys. Tonight was truly an inspirational night to listen to our minister. Keep up the good work. We are very, very proud of you and everything that you do. Thank you to our panel. You guys, asked the right questions and you definitely engaged in the right way tonight. Thank you to all of our viewers. Until next time, I'm your host, Shamiza Ali, and this is the Guyana Dialogue. Good evening, everyone.
Nice.
Good
Thank you,
evening.
Minister. Thank you, panelists, Professor Narayan, Professor Hariraj, Dr. Ganga, and thank you, Shamiza and Asif in the background.